بالعالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين وبعد. So we'll read inshallah ta'ala, go through this and highlight things inshallah. So the first asl principle 1, he says, can anyone read?
The influence of the relationship between the Quran and the various sciences on defining the tools and resources of the exegete.
No.
The Quran was revealed to
So this is important. The first asl is to do with mapping Islamic sciences. The ulum that our ulama have developed were essentially developed to serve the text of the Quran. It is always important to remember the cycle of the questions that existed in the mind of a Muslim scholar before he dealt with the text. So the first question was the question of revelation. What is revelation? And how do I know that there is a God? It's where ilm al-aqidah came. Now, I have known that the truthfulness of revelation, and I believe that there is a God. Right? I believe that there is a God. That means I believe that there is revelation. So what is my duty towards this revelation? This was the second question. What's my duty towards this revelation? From that day on, all other ulum have followed. So the first duty was a duty of preservation. I need to preserve the revelation, to make sure that it is communicated to the coming generations in the same way as it was revealed to the one who firstly received it. So we have a whole plethora of ulum. We have a group of ulum that are called ulum al-tawthiq, the ulum of documentation. So the first question was a question of documentation. So we have ulum al-Quran that relate to the Quran, including ilm al-tajweed, that documents the letters of the Quran, that they are pronounced in the same way as the Prophet ﷺ has pronounced them. The orality of the Quran is preserved in that sense. Then we have ilm al-qira'at, the different modes of recitation. That's a ilm that documents the variants of the words of the Quran as recited by the Prophet ﷺ. It's helpful in something else, but the primary benefit of ilm al-qira'at is documenting the way the Quran was recited. Yes, it will help us in tafsir, it will help us in fiqh, but the primary benefit is it documents naql al-Quran, to communicate the Quran. So ilm al-tajweed, then ilm al-qira'at. Then we have another ilm of documentation that is still related to the Quran, ilm al-rasm, the Quranic script. How is the Quran written? That is relevant to the way it is recited. You don't write Malik in normal language as you write it in the Quran, because it has to carry another recitation in the Quran. Ibn al-Jazari rahimahullah ta'ala says, فكل ما وافق وجه نحوي وكان للرسم احتمالا يحوي وصح إسنادا هو القرآن. So it has to have this probability of accepting Malik, and Malik, that's ilm tawthiq, that's ilm of documentation. We have another ilm of documentation related to the Quran, ilm al-ad, the ilm of counting the ayat of the Quran. So what is the count of the Quran, the Makki and the Madani and the Shami and the Basri and the Kufi, right? These are ulum al-tawthiq. And then ilm al-hadith has also a whole group of ulum that are related to documentation. Ilm al-hadith riwayah, narrating the exact words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ilm al-rijal, documenting the individuals, accrediting or discrediting the individuals who have the responsibility of communicating revelation. None of the sayings of any human being has cherished and garnered such care about reception and documentation. So these are called علوم التوثيق. Answering the second question. After I believe, the second question is, how do I maintain the authenticity? Then the third question would be, how do I understand? Right? How do I understand? The question of how do I understand led us to talk about al-muhkam wal-mutashabih, that which is ambiguous and that which is not ambiguous, things that can accept one interpretation and things that have multiplicity of interpretations, ayat that accept multiplicity of interpretations. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. If you are ill or you are traveling, then perform the fasting in other days. So فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ, does it mean right after Ramadan, or I can delay it till the next Ramadan comes? What if Ramadan is in the summer? Can I delay it until the winter comes? Right? فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. When we say فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ, then you can perform it later. Does it have to be consecutive? If I miss 15 days of Ramadan in a row, do I have to make 15 days in a row? Or can it be separated? Having that dispensation of not observing fast in Ramadan, does it allow me to have another dispensation in making it up? Or since I enjoyed the dispensation here, I cannot enjoy a dispensation in making up? Basically, if you have a voucher and a discount, can you get the voucher and the discount, or you only have one? Right, so these are questions that the ulama ask. If I am dealing with the text, how do I understand the text? Well, if it's muhkam, it's clear. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَجْلِدُهُمْ ثَمَانِينَ جَلْدًا, it's 80 lashes, 80 lashes. There is no 81. But what if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حَتَّى يَطْهُرْنَ, what does يَطْهُرْنَ mean? That women cease to have the menses blood, or does it mean that they take a shower as well? Questions between the fuqaha. فَإِطْعَامُ عَشَرَةِ مَسَاكِينَ, does masakin here mean poor people, or does it mean 10 measurements of mud? Because one of the Arabic words for mud is miskin. So can I then feed 10 amdad to one person? Or do I have to feed the 10 amdad to 10 people? If I miss one day of fasting and I have to make kafara, should I feed the kafara to 60 people, or should I feed the kafara to one person? What matters? Is it feeding, or is it the number of people? Is it the mud or the number of people? Right? So this is a question of asking, of understanding. And obviously understanding will not be straightforward all the time. So we have al-zahir wal-mu'awwal and all of these. So the mufassir has to be aware of different ulum in order to get involved in the Quran. He has to be aware of this map of Islamic ulum, so that he might say to himself, I don't need to study this ilm when it comes to Quran. For example, as we'll see inshallah ta'ala, we'll see some good examples. But for example, we have a ilm called ilm al-arud, prosody. It's an art or a science that deals with meter, poetic meter. And because of this, or based on this, I will distinguish between what is counted as Arabic poetry and what is not Arabic poetry. So most of what we call today modern poetry does not belong to Arabic poetry. Shi'r al-hur, this kind of free rhyme, doesn't have any meter, doesn't have even sometimes rhyme. It doesn't belong. Why? Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi has come up with 16 or 17 meters, metrical shapes, and he said this is what Arabic poetry follows. These are the patterns. So no one can invent. Like someone might say, what does this have to do with the Quran? This is to do with poetry. Why do we need to know this? Another person might argue that if you know this, you will be in position of defending the Quran against those who claim that it is just another form of poetry, by saying, look, this is poetry, and therefore since Quran does not belong to any of these patterns, then it's not poetry. Right? So we need to understand the map, the influence of the relationship between Quran and various sciences on defining the tools and resources of the exegete. Some ulum might be very direct, so you have to know that. Some ulum might be less direct, so you don't need them as much. Now, اقرأ.
The Quran was revealed to a community whose particular genius was its exceptionally masterful use of Arabic. At the time of revelation...
By the way, not all Arabs were like that. Not all Arabs were equally excellent. يعني that claim على أمة بضاعتها اللغة, yes, that varied also. That varied from a group of people, from one tribe to another tribe. So fasaha, or eloquence, or being genius in Arabic language, varied from one tribe to another. Some tribes were really masterful of that. Some tribes were much less. Even the use of language varied. You could easily distinguish between someone who comes from the city, distinguish someone who is from the city from someone who is from the desert, in their use of language. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, Sheikh Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Buti mentions, rahimahullah, that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was waiting at one of the doors of the Haram, and he saw this man standing outside asking people for help and describing how drought has caused them so much damage. So he said, أيها الناس إنه قد أتت علينا سنون محش. We have received very difficult years. الحبت العظم وأكلت اللحم. It has eaten our flesh and it has bent our bones. وأذابت الشحم, and it has melted our fat. فتركت الضئيل جراعة. It has left even the little tiny grass, it left it completely removed. It wiped everything. And he went on in that description. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu knew that this man, he has just come to Mecca for the first time in his life, just from his language. Why? Because this was purely Bedouin language that people in the city do not have. You can even know that by comparing, for example, even after Islam, by comparing Andalusian poetry with Iraqi poetry, for example, or Eastern poetry, or poetry of people who come from the desert. Now, but yet Arabs had masters of balagha. They had individuals who were excellent in their. They were masters of language. Now,
at the time of revelation, the use of the Arabic language had reached a remarkable degree of aesthetic and semantic perfection. This perfection consisted in the elegant manipulation of words and sentences, together with the capacity to provide an intelligent and lucid manner of expression.
So he actually says here in Arabic that Arabs were they had a few qualities that made them masters. Number one, that they had this إجادة والإتقان لفنون القول والأداء. They were exceptionally masters. They had this mastership of the use of language. But remember that mastership of the use of language is also, he says, وَامْتِلَاكِ نَاصِيَةِ الْبَيَانِ. Not sure why didn't he... yes. So at the time of revelation, the use of Arabic language has reached a remarkable degree of aesthetic and semantic perfection. It consisted in, number one, elegant manipulation of words and sentences. So number one quality of Arabs is they had this manipulation of words and sentences. And number two, they had the capacity to provide intelligent and lucid manners of expression. When someone has that ability or that capacity to provide intelligent expression, it reflects their own intelligence and geniusness. So Arabs were people of extreme geniusness. Why? A, they did not delve too much into the subtleties of Greeks. The Greek civilization, Greeks before Arabs, they were consumed in intellectual discourse that sometimes it stultified their minds and made them look very, very stupid. We touched upon some earlier today, like the discussions between the pre-Socratic philosophers. It consisted of, so what is this universe made of? What's the matter that makes this universe? Some suggesting that it is water, because it takes different shapes, takes different states. It can be gas. It can be gas. For them, it meant vapor and moist. It can be liquid, and it can be ice, solid. Others said, no, the substance from which the world is made is actually numbers, because everything has order and has number. Others said, no, what is the world made of? It's made of a substance that we cannot name, but it has existence. It's an original substance. Some of them even said that the world is made of a substance that is composed of particles from every living thing. In other words, human beings are made of flesh and bones and this and that. Okay, so samples of human beings do exist in this original material. The earth is made of clouds and mountains. And okay, some samples, basically they were looking at a kind of a micro universe put in a small substance, and from this substance everything happens. But everything is created, but how do things emerge from that? They said by movement. When these particles move, some particles get together, they are attracted to each other, and they come out as human beings. They come out as cows. They come out as sheep. They come out as mountains. They said possibly it's the power of hate and love. There is hate and love between the particles. So some particles love each other, so they are attracted to each other. Some particles hate each other, so they run away from each other. Some said, no, none of that. It is just atoms moving in vacuum. Moving in vacuum. So there has to be atoms, movement, and vacuum. This is called the atomist school. So the atomist school said that all of these things, yes, as much as they were quite important for the mind, they were kind of intellectual gymnastics, but it pushes people sometimes to conclude that we can't reach the truth, just leave it. So the Sufists that I mentioned earlier, as-Sufistaiyin, they came last in the schools of philosophy in Greece, just before Socrates. And they were fed up with all of these discussions. So they said, you know what? There is no objective reality. Everything is subjective. You want to believe that the world came from samples? No problem. You want to believe that it came from water? No problem. You want to believe that it came from numbers? No problem. You want to believe that it came from atoms? No problem. You want to believe that the world is illusion, because there was a group who said that everything is elusive. Your senses deceive you. You can't see. So there is no world out there. They said there is no world. It's all illusion. You're just deluding yourself. You want to imagine that there is an earth. There is an earth. It's all in your imagination. So the Sufists said, we believe all of these and we accept all of these. They actually moved from seeking the truth, an objective, to making it a job. In other words, some people are arguing and dialoguing to find out something, but some others are arguing and dialoguing just because it shows their mental excellence. Arabs didn't have any of this. So they were people of They had manipulation of words and sentences, but they had the capacity to provide intelligent and lucid manner of expression. Their minds were not consumed in this. You know, when your mind is consumed in dialogues and conversation and controversy, that your mind becomes very weak, exhausted. That's why the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to leave jidal. Jidal is this form of controversy, being taken by controversy, that the individual is no more seeking the truth, he just wants to keep going. So the Arabs had that ability to provide intelligent and lucid manners of expression, and they were adept at using understanding literary expressions. They had that as well. They relate a very interesting story of Al-Sharif al-Radi. Sharif al-Radi was a man from Ahlul Bayt. Him and his brother Al-Sharif al-Murtadi both were poets, and both adopted the Shia school. But they were at two ends of the rope. One would dislike what the other likes. So Al-Sharif al-Radi and Al-Sharif al-Murtadi, one would like someone and the other would hate that individual. So they mentioned that, but they were very, very intelligent. One was very poor, the other was very rich. Someone praises a friend, the other will dispraise him. They were interesting personalities. So at their time, Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri, who was again a poet and a philosopher, made friendship with Al-Sharif al-Murtadi, with Al-Sharif al-Radi, and used to visit him in his palace. He used to host poets to say their poetry and have some discussions. He used to be a man who supports literature. So one day, Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri was walking into the house, was walking into the palace, to the gathering. And he had an argument with a man. Then he sat down, and Abu al-Ala was blind. So Al-Sharif al-Radi used to hate Al-Mutanabbi, who was a great poet. And he said, someone mentioned Al-Mutanabbi, Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri mentioned Al-Mutanabbi, so Al-Sharif al-Radi said, he's just a dog. So Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri said, if he didn't say anything except the poem that starts with لَكِ يَا مَنَازِلُ فِي الْقُلُوبِ مَنَازِلُ, O homes, you have a place in my heart. That's the start of if he didn't say any other poetry except the poem that starts with this line, that's more than enough. So Sharif al-Radi got very agitated, and he asked his servants to carry Abu al-Ala and throw him outside of the palace, throw him in the street. And they couldn't understand, what offense did he do? He just mentioned a line of poetry that doesn't offend him in any way. So after they threw him outside, he looked at the people around him and he said, do you know why did I throw him outside? They said, no. He didn't say anything offensive. He said he intentionally mentioned this poem, even though Al-Mutanabbi has better poems. Because this poem has a line that in the middle of it that says, وَإِذَا أَتَتْكَ مَذَمَّتِي مِن نَاقِصٍ فَهِيَ الشَّهَادَةُ لِي بِأَنِّي كَامِلُ. If a man who's of no status dispraises me, that's a proof that I am perfect. So how would Al-Sharif al-Radi understand that Al-Mutanabbi Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri, by mentioning a poem, he means something else, right? That shows the adeptness of Arabs, that they were adept at using and understanding literary expressions. It's gone.
They had an innate talent for discerning and appreciating virtuosity and rejecting mediocrity.
Yeah.
When the Quran was first revealed to them, two things occurred. First is that they immediately appreciated the greatness, majesty, and miraculous quality of its style. Consequently, they recognized that it was clearly beyond human capability and therefore must have a divine origin.
Yes, so this is number one, that this greatness of Arabs and their understanding of Arabic language and their mastery of Arabic language, number one, made them appreciate the Quran. again, the Quran did not prove itself by being revealed to individuals who just succumb to its ways without knowing it. And this is part and parcel of being a mu'jiza. Al-mu'jiz, or a miracle, is something that makes the other individual unable to produce something like it. And for that to happen, the person has to develop this critical ability. So Arabs had this critical ability. So when they listened to the Quran, they were able to appreciate it. Nowadays, in our world today, we have lost this critical ability in anything. So we've lost our critical ability to knowledge. So we don't appreciate real knowledge anymore. We don't know the difference between knowledge and just public speaking. We've lost our critical ability of Arabic language. So we don't know Hasanul Kalami wa Qabihu. We don't know what is good and what's bad. We don't know what's fasih and what's not. So number one, appreciation. They appreciated the Quran when it was revealed to them. First thing is they appreciated the greatness, majesty and miraculous quality of the style of the Quran. Consequently, they recognized that it was clearly beyond human capability and therefore must have a divine origin. Thus, they recognized the truth. So when we ask why was the Quran revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, because Arabs were the most qualified individuals on earth to appreciate the message of the Quran. Why the choice of Arabs? Because they were the most qualified individuals to appreciate the Quran. Just like Musa alayhi salam, at his time, magicians were the only individuals who could appreciate what he did, and that it's not mediocrity. Isa alayhi salam, it was physicians that could appreciate that his message and his miracles is not just mediocrity, is not just fake, right? So only when Musa alayhi salam showed the miracle, فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سَاجِدِينَ. You know, they say al-jahlu hijab. Ignorance is what? Is hijab. When someone does not know your value, then they will never benefit from you and they will never appreciate who you are. Now,
the second is that not only were they able to assimilate its form consisting in its style and structure, but also to comprehend its content, which consists of its meanings and purposes. Thereafter, the Arab nation actively pursued the analysis of its structure and manners of expression. Consequently, a vast network of interrelated sciences was born, the primary purpose and inspiration of which was the need to understand the Quran.
So here the Quran has worked in two ways. One is it set the standard for new Arabic language. It set the standard for new Arabic language. Sheikh Ramadan al-Bouti actually talks extensively about that. And he says that the fasih of the Quran, the fasih of Arabic language, has changed after the Quran. So the fasih, the classical Arabic language spoken before the Quran, is different from that after the Quran. That's why nowadays when we look for shawahid, when we look for proofs, linguistic proofs to the rules, where do we go? We go to the Quran. Yes, at a certain point, we were looking for proofs for the Quran from Arabic language. But we are past this stage. Right after the Prophet ﷺ, some people doubted. How did Arabs say this? Where is this word coming from? Because the Quran used some words that were not spoken by Quraysh, that were not very common. Like the word khasi'in, the word diza. These were not Qurayshi dialects. So Arabs, some people had to ask. But once this was established, the fasahah of the Quran has been established, the Quran itself became the standard at which they would always look. So that's the meaning of mu'jiza. It sets a new standard. And number two, it became like a heritage for them that they have to preserve and they have to understand. Their work was around the Quran, analyzing the Quran, understanding the styles of the Quran, and they started generating. It became like an energizer to them. It energized them to do something called توليد العلوم, generating sciences. So before the Prophet ﷺ came, Arabs didn't know anything called usul al-fiqh. But they had to develop a science called usul al-fiqh, legal theory, in order to understand the injunctions of the Quran, the words of the Quran, the khitab of the Quran. They didn't have to do that before. It was the khitab, the address of any individual, any poet, any king, was not as important. But they had to develop a whole theory, legal theory, to understand the Quran in that sense. Now,
Imam Suyuti wrote in his Quran, Ibn Abi Fadl al-Mursi says in his Tafsir, the Quran contains the sciences of the ancients amongst humans as well as the latecomers, so that in reality its meaning is known only to him who revealed it, and then to the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, save for that which God, transcendent and exalted is He, has kept to Himself. Then the majority of the leading companions inherited this from him, such as the four caliphs, Ibn Mas'ud and Ibn Abbas, who was able to say, were I to lose the hobble of a camel, I would be able to find it through the book of God subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then it was inherited by those who followed with excellence, but then resolution faltered, knowledge receded, and scholars became too feeble to carry the burden of its sciences and various arts that the companions and followers have carried.
You see, in this way the Quran works also at two levels. Number one, it works at the level of containing all the ulum, and number two, it works at the level of feeding all the ummah into their own specialties. At the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Quran contained all the ulum. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the only one who has encompassed what is in the Quran. But then the ummah started striving to understand what is in the Quran, deciphering the Quran, decoding and uncoding the Quran, extracting from the Quran what it actually contains. At the time of the Sahaba radwanullahi alayhim, they actually varied. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anh said there were certain words that I did not understand in the Quran. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anh said, ما كنت أدري ما الفاطر. He said, I didn't know what does fatir mean. That word was not a common word to me. حتى لقيت رجلين, until I met two people, two individuals. يختلفان في خيمة. They were fighting over a tent. Who is the owner of that tent? فقال أحدهما أنا فطرتها. So one of them said, I erected it. I established it. I originated it. So he said, I understood that fatara means to originate. But Abu Bakr, was his language low level? It wasn't. But some Sahaba had to ask each other. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said, لو ضاع لي عقال بعير لوجدته في كتاب الله. If I lose, Ibn Abbas, what did he say? He said, were I to lose the hobble of my camel, I would be able to find it through the book of Allah. How? If you ask people today, if you lose something, if you lose the key to your car, will you find it in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? People wouldn't understand. So dealing with the Quran now, even with knowledge, even with qualification, still has its limitations. Because people have limitations. So how about dealing with the Quran without any limitations? One of the shuyukh in Egypt was relating a funny story. He said a man came to him and he said, don't you say that Quran contains everything? He said, well, we believe so. He said, can you tell me, in Egypt they used to sell flour, baking flour, in bags of 25 kg. So he said, can you tell me from the Quran how many loaves of bread I can make from this 25 kg flour bag? So he called there was a bakery shop next door. So he called the guy, the baker, and he said, how many loaves of bread will you get from? And he said, such and such amount. He said, he returned to the guy, he said, such and such amount. He said, you didn't get that from the Quran. He said, it is from the Quran. The Quran says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. And when it comes to bread, this is the man of knowledge. This is the person I can return to and ask. Right? So Imam al-Suyuti is saying that you can find everything in the Quran. Even with qualification you can, but you still have the limitations. Ibn Abbas said, if I lose the hobble of my camel, I will be able to find it in the Quran. But then look at the decline of knowledge. Ibn Abbas with his knowledge and with his talent. Look at the decline of knowledge. Then we have the Tabi'een, the following generation. What happened? They became feeble, the scholars became feeble to carry the burden of the sciences of the Quran, because it requires diligence and talent. So, with the generations to come, they decided to divide the burden of dealing with the Quran, because not everyone can encompass all of these ulum. That's why back in the days, 500-600 years ago, we were able to see what we call encyclopedic scholars, who have mastered a lot of ulum, a lot of areas of specialty. So they are theologians, fuqaha, together. But nowadays, that's nearly impossible. Specialization becomes very specific. So, فَاعْتَنَى قَوْمٌ كُنْ.
Thereafter, they separated these sciences into distinct specialities, each group concentrating on one specialty. One group concerning itself with the linguistics, semantics, counting the letters and investigating their pronunciation, counting the words, verses, surahs, hizbs, nifs and rub, and number of frustrations, marking the end of each 10 verses, counting the number of times a given word is repeated and the number of similar verses. This was done without delving into its meanings or meditation on its content. They were called al-Qurra, the readers or reciters.
So this is documentation now. So these ulum, they are so important, the people who are working on them, even though they are not actually readers. They're not readers in the sense that they don't read the Quran, but because their job is to facilitate the reading of the Quran, whether by dividing it or by confirming its pronunciation or by counting the words of the Quran or by the numbers of prostration or by marking the end of each 10 verses, which we call ushr. This whole idea of dividing the Quran into 10 verses and then there is a mark, or ruba', which is 1/8 of a juz, or hizb, which is half of the juz. Well, was the Quran like that essentially at the time of the Prophet ﷺ? No. The Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ as surahs, with no further divisions. But the ulama realized it is very difficult for people. At the time of Rasulullah ﷺ, he would start in Salat al-Fajr, he would start Surah al-Baqarah and keep going 4 or 5 ajza without a stop. And the Sahaba had that patience. But they realized that it will be difficult for people to memorize it. It will be difficult for people to read it in Salah. So, yes, the Quran has surahs and has verses. But let's bundle each 10 ayat together, each 5 ayat together, each ruba' together, each half a juz. So these divisions, number one, they make the whole recitation of the Quran easy. And secondly, they encourage people. They encourage people. I can't remember where did I read this, but it's about learning. That if you would like to learn something big, you have to divide it into small portions. They say that Abu al-Fadl, I think it's Ibn Aqil al-Hanbali, he says, إِنَّمَا السَّيْلُ اجْتِمَاعُ النُّقَطِ. He says, إِنَّمَا السَّيْلُ اجْتِمَاعُ النُّقَطِ. The flood is just little drops of rain. It's little drops of rain. اليوم علم وغدا مثله من درر العلم التي تلتقط يحصل المرء بها حكمة فإنما السيل اجتماع النقط. So breaking things into small portions, it teaches you 2 things. Number one, it facilitates your job, and number 2, it teaches you patience. that you have to be consistent every single day, every single day. I know that some people normally prefer to do things as bulks. There are these intensive times of doing things, and then afterwards they relax. But I personally don't prefer that, and I find it very, like I can't do things in that way. I prefer to do things much slower, but a few books, like reading a few books at the same time. It might even take months, like pages, couple of pages before going to bed, or a couple of pages in the morning, but it's like that. It's achievable this way. So those ulama, what they did, they divided the Quran into small portions. So we have something called Ashr. That's Ashr ayat, 10 ayat. They put it in 10 ayat, and after every 10 ayat, they will write the word Ashr. Or they put number 10 on the margin. Why? Because in this way, number one, number Ashara, 10, is the least perfect number. The least perfect number in Arabic language is what? 10. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ عَشَرَةٌ كَامِلَةٌ. Because Ashara is the first time you see one again. Isn't it? This is the first time you see one again. 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, up till 10. Then once you get to 10, it's 1. And then what do you get? You just move the zero from one side to the other side. You moved it from the left to the right. And then the maximum number of perfection in Arabic language is 1,000. Because anything after 1,000 is a multiplication. An Arabic alphabet is a perfect alphabet, because the numerical value of the Arabic alphabet is 1,000. أبجد هوز حطي كلم سعفص قرشت ثخذ ضضغ. If you put a number 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 10, and then 20, 30 up to 100, and then 200 up to 1,000, ضضغ غين is 1,000. So they say, numerically speaking, mathematically speaking, Arabic alphabet is a perfect alphabet. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about Surah Al-Qadr, about Laylatul Qadr, Laylatul Qadr khayrun min alf shahr. They said because it's if you just hit one Laylatul Qadr, it's better than any perfection that you can aim at. So Arabs used to look at that. Now, when they wanted to help you, the tabi'in, they wanted to help you memorize the Quran, would they put the maximum number or the lowest number of perfection? So the lowest number of perfection, 10. When you hit 10 ayat, you say, well, I've actually done 10 ayat. So you have a feeling of completeness when you recite the Quran. You have a feeling of completeness. In fact, Sheikh Al-Imam Sakhawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and before him Al-Imam ibn Khaqan, these two were great scholars of Tajweed, early scholars. Al-Imam Al-Khaqani rahimahullah ta'ala, the author of Nuniyya, he mentions some etiquettes of teaching Quran. And he says a teacher of the Quran, when he teaches a student, he should not let the student read more than 10 ayat. Like a student comes to study, the Sheikh says, don't let the student read more for hifz, more than 10 ayat at a time. When he finishes the 10, he moves on. And then he finishes the 10, then he moves on. Then he finishes the 10. Yes, it can be less than that if the student is like slow in memorization. But if the student is good, then 10. So they divided these Ashr, 10 and 10 and 10 for memorization. Then they actually divided the ayat of the Quran in a different way for recitation in Salah. So in the Pakistani Masahif, you have something called ruku'. Right? You find that next to on the margin is something called ruku'. They have this word, ruku'. What does ruku' mean? It means this is how much you should read in a rak'ah. So this is how much you should read in a rak'ah. At the end of this, you should go into ruku'. Otherwise, longer than this or less than this, your salah will be either too fast or will be too slow. Right? You shouldn't read more than this. And they have something called manzil. That's possibly for revision. And so on and so forth. SubhanAllah, even back in the days when they used to have these celebrations of reciting Quran, people reading in public, they used to say to the Sheikh, اقرأ لنا عشر, read عشر to us, 10, means 10 ayat, because that was the norm in slow reading. So this was facilitation with dividing the Quran into nisf, counting the words of the Quran, the prostrations of the Quran, which is important for the madhabs. Where would you prostrate in the Quran? Is there a point of prostration? In the Maliki school, for example, there is no لا sujuda fil mufassal. All the mufassal of the Quran from Surah Al-Hujurat downwards, or from Qaf downwards, there is no sajdas. So, كلا لا تطعه واسجد واقترب in Surah Iqra بسم ربك الذي خلق. Right? That's sujood in some madhabs, but not in Maliki madhab. Because it's in the mufassal of the Quran. The two sajdateen in Hajj, end of Hajj and middle of Hajj. ألم ترى أن الله يسجد له من في السماوات ومن في الأرض والشمس والقمر والنجوم والجبال والشجر والدواب. And then يا أيها الذين آمنوا اركعوا واسجدوا واعبدوا ربكم. One of them is recognized in some madhab. The other is not recognized, so on and so forth. So they facilitated. These ulama were called al-Qurra. Naam. So this is the first group, documenting. The second one?
Grammarians concentrated on the grammatical analysis of nouns, verbs and articles. They discussed at length the nouns and their derivatives and the various kinds of verbs. Some made extensive analysis of ambiguous expressions, whilst others analyzed it word by word.
To number one, show and prove the exactness of the Quran in its agreement with Arabic language, and also to set the standard for i'rab afterwards. That's why when some people object to the Quran and say, how come the Quran is saying that إِنَّ هَذَانِ لَسَاحِرَانِ إِنَّ هَذَانِ لَسَاحِرَانِ, how come did they say that? The Quran says that this is not in agreement with Arabic language. You say, no, it is in agreement with Arabic language. You just need to make sure that you understand all the dialects that were spoken in Arabia. Because some people, some dialects would, for example, they would add waw and noon, and alif and noon, and ya and noon to the verb. Basically, they would add the plural sign to the verb. Others wouldn't. When the Prophet ﷺ said, يَتَعَاقَبُونَ فِيكُمْ مَلَائِكَةٌ بِاللَّيْلِ وَمَلَائِكَةٌ بِالنَّهَارِ, Quraysh say, يَتَعَاقَبُ فِيكُمْ. But there were other Arabs who spoke like that. And the Quran was not revealed to one group. So the grammarians, their work was to, number one, to prove the authenticity of the Arabicness of the Quran, and at the same time to set the standard for any Arabic that came afterwards. They did this analysis of the Quran, like Ibn Nahas. Ibn Nahas has i'rab al-Quran in big 4 volumes. Az-Zamakhshari, he worked on the grammar of the Quran. They looked at transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. They looked at the writing of the Quran. The other day, subhanAllah, I was reading قول الله عز وجل وهو الذي جعل الليل والنهار خلفة لمن أراد أن يذكر أو أراد شكورا. Surah Al-Furqan. It is He who has made the day and the night alternate for the one لمن أراد أن يذكر, for the one who wants to be reminded. So the day and night serve as a reminder for people who want to be reminded. The day and the night serve as reminders. They remind you of the shortness of your life. They remind you of the power of Allah. But Khalaf from Hamza, another qira'ah, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ اللَّيْلَ وَالنَّهَارَ خِلْفَةً لِمَنْ أَرَادَ أَنْ يَذْكُرَ, for the one who wants to remember Allah. So one is the day and night remind you. The other is they facilitate the process of dhikr. Because if the whole day, if your life was a long day without any sunset and no sunrise, how would you know the timings? How would you divide the salah? How would you read your adhkar in the morning? And People who have no clocks, they have no iPhones. They just have the natural clock, the biological clock. Where the morning the sun sets and the sun rises, they can easily link their Fajr and their Maghrib with these. And Dhuhr and Asr will be by approximation in between. So وهو الذي جعل الليل والنهار خلفة لمن أراد أن يذكر. If you would really want to remember Allah, you need to do something very simple. Just have a relation with the cosmos, a relation with the world around you. Don't have a relation with the materialistic world that's of your own. Guy Eaton says something really, really significant. He said, one of the problems of today's world, of this civilization, this materialistic civilization, is that it cut human beings from the environment and it made them only related to technology. So what's problematic with that? When you relate to technology, you're relating to something that is of your own make. When you relate with environment, you relate to something that's of His own make, of Allah's make. So how is that different? Your own make is a second-hand environment. Technology is second-hand environment. While the environment, the real cosmos, is first-hand environment. So one elevates you, the other degrades you. One takes you down, the other enables you to think. Another thing is, it has even an ideological impact. When you deal with things that you manufacture yourself, it gives you a feeling that you are a god. You are a maker. You make things. While when you deal with the universe that is of Allah's make, it shows you that you are another individual in so much. They say agriculture is closer to human nature than industry. And in a good society, industry should be subsequent to agriculture, not the other way around. So we're not saying that society should throw industrialization aside, but we're saying that agriculture should be ahead of industry. Nowadays, when the society becomes completely industrialized, it thinks of producing, just producing. While if it's about agriculture, it's utilizing the earth. And then when you manufacture, you manufacture based on your needs. I manufacture in proportion to what I'm going to use. But when your main focus is only to make and to manufacture, then you start looking, who is going to consume this? Because you're just making and piling and storing and piling and storing. So who's going to use this? So you have to create a greed. You have to create greed in people, gluttony, so that people can consume that. Otherwise, you will have all of these products in your storages without using them. To serve that continuous production and to make people use it, you have to encourage them. You have to create an incentive. What's that incentive? Media serves in making people think that satisfying their desires and fulfilling their pleasures is the best thing. This is the happiness. So the happiness, then the society becomes a hedonistic society. A hedonistic society is a society that thinks that fulfilling its physical pleasures is the only way to happiness. And human beings fall into that circle. They fulfill their desires and they realize that, their desires are not. After they have fulfilled their basic desires, they didn't get what they were looking for. So you have to create new desires, these fantasies, so that they try something new. And then they get bored. And then they invent something else. So you start breaking the solids of the society, the principles of the society. So the ulama of the past, when they looked at Arabic language, they served the Quran through the Arabic language. So this is the documentation and proving the miracle. And then?
Exegetes concentrated on the expressions same word may either mean the same thing every time or two or more different things.
So we have the alfaz al-Quran, the words of the Quran. We have what we call extension and intention. intention. Extension and intention. Intention is a word, a concept. Extension is what does this word apply on. So sometimes the word applies to one thing, like the word thalatha. Thalatha, in terms of the number, it only applies to 3. But in terms of representation, it can apply to 3 apples, it can apply to 3 oranges, it can apply to 3 bicycles, it can apply to loads of other things. But the word ayn, that word can apply depending on the context. I need the context to know what are you talking about. So ayn is a letter in Arabic language, in the alphabet, letter ayn. And ayn also is the eye. And ayn is a fountain. And ayn is a spy. A human being is a spy because his main job is to use his eye to spy on others. So I wouldn't actually be able to understand what do you mean by ayn separately. I have to look at the context. So the Mufassirun looked through the Quran and they realized that some words of the Quran, some expressions of the Quran, they either mean the same thing every time or 2 or more different things. Yes, go on.
Therefore, they left the first as it is and strove to explain what was not obvious and discussed the probabilities for deciding in favor of one meaning and not the other for words with 2 or more meanings.
Yes, so they looked at this word in the Quran. وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوء. Divorced women should stay in waiting period for 3 quru. Quru, plural of what? They said plural of qur. What is qur? Periods of time. A period of time. But what period of time? They said, oh, let's go back to Arabic language. Arabs use the word qur to refer to period of purity in between 2 menses. And they also use it to refer to menses. So some use it to refer to menses and some use it to refer to purity. So this poet says, he was describing a fighter. He said he was in war continuously that he missed the aqra of his wives. He missed the aqra. Of course, he wouldn't have intimacy with his wife in a period of menses. So missing the aqra must have meant missing the periods when they were pure from their menses, free from their menses. The other says, oh, he was fighting and stabbing his enemy that he made his thawb as if it is the thawb of a woman who is in her qur. That his thawb was smudged with blood as if it's the thawb of a woman who was in her qur. Oh, there must be reference to menses. So they started thinking, so if a woman is divorced, how long should she stay in iddah? Should it be the time of menses or should it be the time of purity? That they realized that it's used in this and it's used in that. So they did their hard work in deciding. Sometimes they could decide by extraneous indications, and sometimes it doesn't help them because the word is equally used, is used in both meanings in an equal method. So someone might ask, why is it, this doubt might emerge. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this is kitabun mubin, that this is a manifest book, how can it be mubin while it has words that have more than one meaning and there is no way that we can reach a final say about that? But that's the essence of ibana. Ibana does not mean that you give one meaning only. Ibana could mean also manifestation, that you give all the possible scenarios so that you facilitate for the person to fall. So how is that beneficial? That there is no final decision between the fuqaha. So some say it's 3 periods of purity, others say it's 3 periods of menses. How is that beneficial? It's beneficial because women do not have a systematic pattern of menses. So some women have menses for 2 days. Right? Some women have menses for 15 days. Some women have bleeding when they have pregnancy. In books of fiqh, they say that. Science says, no, that's not possible. Some women might not have menses at all. They live all their life without having that. In fact, weather, temperament, body temperament, and other biological reasons can leave their impact and cause women to have different types of menses, different lengths of menses. And if the Quran said it's only one way, it would have been very, very difficult. Right? Very, very difficult. إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع. When the call to prayer on يوم الجمعة, when the call to prayer is announced and you have to go to the masjid, leave all the business and go. طيب, I am conducting a business now and I could hear the adhan, so I quickly finished it. Or I went ahead and I finished my business and I joined the khutbah late. Is the business valid or invalid? In the ulama of usul, Shafi'i school, they say it's invalid. Why is it invalid? They said, because you have, is it invalid or valid? They said, no, something like this is valid. Why is it valid? Because it's not prohibited because of intrinsic prohibition, it's an extrinsic prohibition. It is not like saying you can't sell gold for gold with discrepancy. It is not like selling a dirham for a dirham with discrepancy. No. This is to do with something external. So the sale itself is not problematic. What's problematic is doing it at the time of Friday, because you should be doing your salah. So why did they say something like this? They say something like that to preserve the rights of the seller. What if the seller is not a Muslim? You're selling something to a non-Muslim in the market. And then you realized that I could have sold this for a better price. So you went back and abused religion to justify the annulment of the sale and said to him, oh, you know what? I actually sold you this at the time of Friday and I shouldn't have sold it to you. Can we revoke? It's an invalid sale. But your intention is not to invalidate the sale for the sake of Allah, but to invalidate the sale for making a better transaction and selling it to somebody else. But you're just abusing the faith. So that difference of opinion helps. And where does the difference of opinion come from? It comes from the Quran itself. So it is mubin. This mubin, abana in Arabic, means to unveil, to remove the ambiguity. And all of these life situations have ambiguity related to them. So something will not mubin unless it can be understood in different ways and fit in every situation. So there are levels. So ibana, or lack of ambiguity or clarity, does not mean it's understood only in one way, but it's understood in different ways so that it fits different scenarios. Even a weak opinion or a weak interpretation helps people who have a problem. Right? Go on, Sidi.
The students or principal experts concentrate.
And also one important thing is, as he says here, وَأَعْمَلَ كُلٌّ مِّنْهُمْ فِكْرَهُ. They strove to explain what was not obvious and discuss the probabilities for deciding in favor of one of the meanings. So it encouraged these ulama to exert their effort. It encouraged them to use the most honorable part of them. What's the most honorable part of human beings? Their intellect. So if the Quran is encouraging you, like putting a challenge, so your challenge is, how can I get the best out of this? How can I delve to the depths of meanings? You won't be able to delve to the depths of meanings unless the meaning itself is very challenging. How would a teacher discover the best of his students in maths? By giving them very easy to solve problems. No, by giving them challenging ones. So the higher and the deeper the text is, the more challenging it becomes. And the more challenging it becomes, it forces you to discover and utilize the best out of you, which is your aql, your intellect. Yeah, go on.
Usulis or principal experts concentrated on the rational proofs, axiomatic principles, and deductive arguments, as in his saying, subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning, had there been in them many gods, they would have become corrupted.
So the usuliyun, there are two types of usuliyun. We have usuliyun of fiqh. These are the ones who look at the legal theory behind the legislative system of Islam. But these are not the ones we're talking about. The ones we're talking about here are usuliyun as theologians. What do theologians do? They look into the Quran and see the intellectual proofs through the Quran. You know, someone objects to theology as we discuss it and say, where did you get all of these laws from? The law of contradiction. That something cannot be itself and something else at the same time. Something cannot exist and not exist at the same time. Where do you get these from? That there is the Quran. The Quran has that. The Quran speaks of ad-dawr wa tasalsul, infinite regress and circularity. Am khuliqu min ghayri shay'. Have they been created without a creator? Am humul khaliqun, or have they created themselves? That's circularity. Did you create? The Quran is saying, did you create yourself? The question will be, in order to create myself, I have to be created. Isn't it? In order to create myself, I have to exist. But I have to exist in a position when I was not already existing. That's the law of contradiction. Therefore, I have not created myself. Therefore, circularity is impossible, is absurd. Am khuliqu min ghayri shay', or they were created from nothing. Or nothing, we said, it doesn't have it's lack of potential. So how can lack of potential cause a potential? There has to be something actual in order to move something else, right? So the usuliyin look at these ayat. لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. Had there been in them many gods, they would have become corrupted. So if you look at this ayah from the back to the front, they would have become corrupted. Looking at the universe, corrupted means the law of functioning, the functionality of the universe wouldn't have been so symmetric. So look at the universe. Oh, it's nothing in it is corrupted. In fact, it's full of precision and system. Therefore, there is not many gods. So you reverse the ayah. The premise, the first premise, is the last, is the conclusion. لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. Therefore, فحوى الخطاب is there is no corruption. And because there is no corruption, there is no other gods. The details of that are what we will be studying inshaAllah ta'ala in Aqidah. Al-Allama Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Wazir rahimahullah ta'ala, he studied Greek logic and he also looked at the Quran. And he wrote a book, تفضيل أساليب القرآن على أساليب اليونان, where he expounded how the Quran contains what the Greek logicians used to use in their logic and beyond. See, did you want to break for Asr? So break for Asr, inshaAllah. So, no. So with the usuliyin or the theologians, the usulis here means the theologians, they have extracted from the Quran the proof of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, qidam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the baqa, the eternality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, absoluteness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is subhanahu wa ta'ala is subsistent, has subsistence, perceived, He preceded the known universe, and that He's not contingent, and all of these. So if someone says, where did you get these from? Where did you get these theological themes from? They do exist in the Quran in the same way as ahkam al-sharia do exist in the Quran. We don't have, for example, the 5 legal rulings, al-wajib, wal-muharram, wal-makruh, wal-mandub, that does not exist in the Quran in its wording. There is nowhere in the Quran where it says وَهَذَا wajib. Even the use of the word kariha, to dislike, in the Quran and the Sunnah are different. They said wherever the word kariha in the Quran is mentioned, it might indicate haram, while if it's mentioned in the Sunnah, it might indicate makruh, or if it's mentioned in the Quran, it indicates makruh, and if it's mentioned in the Sunnah, it indicates haram. So the indication of certain things, certain words in the Quran, is understood differently because the usage of the fuqaha is different from the usage of the Quran. And the usage of the usuliyin, I mean theologians, the usage of the theologians is different from the usage of the Quran. But the roots of that, Allahu la ilaha, for example, the baqa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where did the ulama find it? They found it in that word, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. They said qayyum means al-qa'imu bi kulli shay'in ala kulli shay'. So qayyum, qayyumiyya means that he has to observe and to preserve and to take care. And in order to do that, he has to precede things and he has to subsist after things. هو الأول والآخر. If you take al-awwal wal-akhir, the first and the last, they refer to al-qidam also and al-baqa. But هو الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. That refers to al-mukhalaf al-hawadith, that he is different from created and contingent beings. Why? Because every being requests what? Stillness. And stillness in essence is sina. Is to have that kind of sleep, siesta, moment of stillness. That every created being requires that stillness. But if he's لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم, he's not taken by sleep, which is observable stillness, or sina, which is non-observable stillness. Right? And sina in Arabic also means change. Tasanna means to change. He's not taken by change. So he's not subject to change. He's not subject to potentialities. Human beings, anything in this universe is subject to change. It moves from one state to another. Logically, that's logical possibility. So if he's not subject to change, he's not subject to logical possibilities. So what is he? He's a necessity. Right? He's a necessity. So even though the wording of these proofs is not exactly as how they are drawn in the Quran, but they draw on the wording, on the Quran itself, on the meanings that are taken from the Quran. Now,
and other such verses from which they drew their proofs of God's oneness, affirming His existence, pre-existence and subsistence, power and knowledge, and negating anything that is not becoming of Him. All is science, usul al-din, the science of the principles of religion.
yeah.
Another group studied the meaning of the discourse and saw that some of it was general, some particular.
So the focus of these individuals, these coming ones, is the discourse of the Quran. How does the Quran converse to us? Does it always converse in literal use, or does it refer to metaphorical use sometimes?
They derive from it the rules importance of categorizing what is literal and what is figurative, what is specific and what is general, and the manners in which information is conveyed. Explicit declarations, synthetic statements, clear as opposed to ambiguous passages, commands and prohibitions, aggregations, and various kinds of analogical reasoning.
They saw in the Quran, for example, skimming through the Quran, they saw ayat in the Quran that cannot be, by all means, cannot be still applicable. As قول الله عز وجل يا أيها الذين آمنوا عليكم أنفسكم لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم. O you who believe, mind your own selves. The one who is misguided will not harm you as long as you're guided. Oh, but this contradicts the principles of the Quran that tell us that we should تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر, that you should command that which is good and forbid that which is evil. How can we be told to promote that which is good and forbid that which is evil, and at the same time the Quran tells us no problem if you become indifferent. If people are in a mess, as long as you're okay, it's fine. This is what the first ayah says. لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم. You will not be harmed if someone is misguided as long as you're guided. This creates an indifferent society. So they realize that these don't work together. So there must be a reconciliation. So they had to go somewhere, look at the occasions of revelations. This actually caused some people some confusion. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu said to the man who recited this ayah, he said, أي بعد أن تفعلوا ما أمرتم به, i.e. after you have fulfilled what you've been commanded to do by promoting good and forbidding evil. If the person doesn't listen to you, doesn't pay attention to you, you've done your best and the person is not going to listen, okay, there is no harm on you. Because you have responsibility to deliver, not to force people to follow you. Another ayah in the Quran, one of the Sahaba came and he said, since I fought in Badr and I was one of the early supporters of Islam, there is no harm on me if I eat anything I wish or I drink anything I wish, even if it is alcohol. ليس على الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جناح فيما طعموا إذا ما اتقوا وآمنوا وعملوا الصالحات ثم اتقوا وآمنوا ثم اتقوا وأحسنوا. So the ayah says, as long as you're righteous and you're good, there is no harm in whatever you want to eat, that you eat it. So the ayah simply says, well, you can just go and eat pork as long as you're a good person. Some Muslims might use that, humanist Muslims. They will say, as long as my heart is clean, I don't have to wear hijab. As long as my heart is clean, إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر. Prayer prohibits you from doing indecency and falling into sin. As long as you avoid sin, then you don't have to pray. As long as you have fulfilled the objective, Salah is a tool. No. Salah is an objective in itself. Salah is an objective in itself. People who try to read the Quran through existential framework. As long as Salah came as a means. Zakah, what has Zakah come for? To purify our money. Okay, I can give tax with the intention of purifying my money. You're laughing at that. Wallahi, I actually heard a research paper saying that. Academic research paper saying since the Quran was revealed in an existential framework and the purpose of zakah was to purify. Now, if a person has a good intention in giving tax, that he purifies his money, he can make the intention, he can give tax with the intention of zakah and he doesn't have to give zakah anymore. Some people produce that type of discourse. So the ulama looked at this and they said, no, hold on. This ayah of eating whatever you wish was revealed in a specific context. It was revealed regarding the people of Badr, who before the prohibition of alcohol, they used to drink alcohol. So now becoming Muslims, and with the prohibition of alcohol, they thought, so what about our previous life? The Quran said, there is no harm on you. Everything before is forgiven. So the usuliyin, the scholars of usul al-fiqh, looked at all of this. They talked about takhsis wal ikhbar والنص والظاهر والمجمل. So a nas is an ayah or a text from the Quran that has only one interpretation. The word nas, which means text, has different meanings. One meaning is when you quote from another book, that's called nas, that's a text. But nas in usul means the letter of the text as is understood, and it doesn't have any ambiguity related to it. But then al-mujmal is that text that has two meanings or more than one meaning, and I am yet to discover which one is more preponderant and stronger than the other. That's mujmal. Once I have realized which one, then the one that is more probable is called zahir, and the one that's less probable is called mu'awwal. Right? That's called mu'awwal. So as we gave before the example, the word qur', it's mujmal. But it's mujmal before they have interpreted it. When Imam Malik did his research, and then he said, well, Arabs use it more to refer to period of purity, then the meaning of qur' is as a period of purity. This is the zahir for Malik. If somebody else says, well, it actually refers to menses, that's the zahir for him. So no word will remain mujmal at all the way through, unless there is no way that it's 50-50. There is no way that you can settle this. Then it remains mujmal. But once you lean towards one interpretation, then one is zahir and the other is called mu'awwal. There is am and there is khas. There is amr and there is nahi. Is every command, is every amr, is every command an obligation? So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example, says, "A'fu liha," grow your beards, is it an obligation? So if someone shaves, and when he said "a'fu," does it mean leave it without even trimming it, or does it mean leave it but trim it? When he said "Salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi," make sure that you shorten your clothes, that they do not drag behind you on the floor. Does that mean if you don't do it, you are disobedient? Or mukhalafat al-awla, or you have actually violated what is better? When he said huffu sharib, what does that mean? Does trimming the mustache fulfill? Does shaving the mustache fulfill? Does leaving the traces of the mustache fulfill? Right? So the usul come in here to give us all of these nuances of language and texts. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاء, or you touch women, what does lamasa mean? Does it mean touch? So you are buying something in the corner shop, the lady behind the till is giving you some change, and her hand touched your hand. Is your wudu invalid because it's touching? Or is it casual touching, so it does not invalidate because there is no intention, there is no bad intention? So what does that? And touching. What if a person, as we were discussing the other day, what if a person has 6 fingers, an extra unnatural finger, and he touches with that? Will that be counted as touching as well? So where will you find that in the Quran? The usuliyin have that discussion, that deep discussion. So they looked at ma'ani al-khitab, the meanings of the discourse of the Quran. They saw some are general, some are particular. Some rules for categorizing, they derive some rules for categorizing what is literal and what's figurative, what's specific and what's general, the manners in which the information is conveyed. Sometimes it's explicit declaration, sometimes it's synthetic statement, sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's ambiguous, sometimes it's commands, sometimes it's prohibitions. Does command have to be coming from someone of higher authority? Or can command come from someone even if they are not of higher authority? In other words, what if the person who is telling you to do certain things is not higher than you? Does that make his command lower in effectiveness? Or it doesn't? هل الأمر مع الاستعلاء أو مع العلو. Different things. Isti'la is the person feels, or he has a feeling, or he has an impression, or he believes that he's higher than you, whether he is or not. Al-ulu is that he's higher than you. In reality, he is. So will the command of a person who believes that he's higher than you, but he's not? Give you a practical example in life. Your son or your daughter says, get me this dress. They believe that they have an upper hand on the father or the mother, isn't it? I said, let's go. So you don't fulfill. But if it's your father saying, get me this, it's ulu. They are in position already. So when your boss says you have to do this, or when somebody else at work who's lower than you or at the same level, he says, get me this, which one will you be treated as a command, as a real command, so there is consequence of punishment if you don't fulfill it, and which one you will not? Is it necessary for a command to include ulu, that the person has to be higher than you for his command to be effective, to be taken seriously? Or just the fact that it's a command in form, we just take it as a command regardless of who is issuing it? So all of these discussions are in ilm al-usul. And also we have aqisa, analogical reasoning. So if we have two situations, one is stated in Sharia. The Sharia says, if you do this, you get that. The hukm is stated. The cause or the illah of hukm, of the ruling, is stated. And I have a new case at hand that I'm unable to decide about. And I want to find a ruling for it. So I try to approximate it to the closest similar original case in Sharia. If the cause is stated, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, kullu muskirin khamr, anything that intoxicates is wine. So someone invents a new drink. And he says, well, this is not stated in Sharia. What's the hukm of this? I say, well, does it intoxicate? Yes, it does. Okay. What about this drink? It has a very wine has a very offensive smell as well, but that's not the reason for prohibition. So you might find a drink that has a very offensive smell and still it's halal. It's not the smell that makes it haram, it's the intoxication. But what if, that's clear if the illah is stated, but what if the new case is similar to two original cases? One can take it in one direction, the other can take it in another direction. They give a very interesting example. At the time when slaves used to be sold like property. If someone inflicts harm on a human being, they have to pay something called blood money, which is stated in Sharia. Indemnity, blood money, regaled, depending on what you have actually damaged. If you damage a hand, if you damage a leg, if you damage a finger, even the juruh, the different wounds. So if it's mudiha, if it is a wound that is deep enough to show the bones, there's a specific punishment for that. If it's less than that, if it's more than this, it is decided in accordance to what? In accordance to the limitations of Sharia. That's a human being. But what if a person inflicts a harm on a slave? What is damaged here is not just the slave, it's the value of this slave who is sold. So do we inflict upon the wrongdoer blood money as usual, or do we inflict them the difference in price that will be reduced from the price of this slave were he to be sold in the market now? Because this slave, being a human being, he has He's addressed with legal responsibilities like salah, isn't it? Even though some salah is not addressed to him, like Salatul Jumu'ah. Zakah, he doesn't pay zakah. So he doesn't have a full legal capacity. And at the same time, human beings are not sold in a market, but this is sold in the market. So this discussion, if someone kills an individual with sharp object, like knife, it kills. Which means, even if the person claims that he did not have the intention, we don't take him seriously. And say, no, it's very likely that you had an intention. It's not treated as manslaughter. Manslaughter, if like pushing him or you hitting him with something that doesn't normally kill, and he died, that's manslaughter. You're hitting with like a small stick that doesn't kill, it damages, but you don't stab him with a knife or a dagger and say, I was just joking. But what about shooting someone with a gun? Where would the gun fit in that discussion? Because at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and after, there was no guns. A relation with banks, where would it fit? Would the bank be my deputy, my agent? I'm giving the bank the power to trade in my money. And will he be my business partner so I can actually take money from the money that I'm giving to the bank because the bank is trading in my behalf? Or I'm entrusting the bank with the money, therefore the bank should not be giving me anything. Because if I give you the money as trust, you can't trade in it. If you trade in it, you will be betraying the trust. You're making profit from money that's not yours. And neither do you have a permission. Right? All of these discussions, the fuqaha, the usuliyin, looked at it. Now,
another group studied the meanings of the this has the cultural fitness for the jurisprudence, where another group studied what it made licit and what it made illicit, as well as all its other legal rulings. They derived principal rules from which secondary ones branched off, and they called this ilm al-furu', the science of branches, or ilm al-fiqh, the science of jurisprudence. Another group studied the narratives concerned with the ancient past and gone by communities and extracted their stories. They call this qasas, history and narratives.
Yeah, so the benefit of these Quranic narratives is we study the linear decline and ascendance of history. We see the qualities of different societies. We see what do communities do and how they treat the word of God. As we will see later, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only related a very limited number of stories to us. Some of them were stories of prophets, and some of them were not stories of prophets. Like the story of Al-Khadr is not a story related to a prophet, even though Musa alayhi salam was involved. The Quran related certain. What does the Quran relate about Al-Yasa'? Nothing. Dhul Kifl? Nothing. Ilyas? Nothing. We know of them, but what does the Quran say about them? Not much. What does the Quran say about Shu'aib alayhi salam? A little bit. What does the Quran say about Lut alayhi salam? What does the Quran say about Musa? When a prophet's life is very eventful life, and he lived within a community, and that community did a lot of things that might be helpful for us to know, to be warned from, then the Quran relates these stories. So the relation of the stories of the Quran, yes, one of its benefits is to soothe the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, but also to give us how to read history and how to read human behavior. Ibn Khaldun says in the Muqaddimah that وَالْبَادُ أَقْرَبُ فِطْرَةً إِلَى الْخَيْرِ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْمُدُنِ. People who live in a Bedouin society outside of cities, villages, they are prone to be better and good. They are prone to be good. They have this goodness, inherent goodness, than people who live in civil society. He says because they don't have too many ambitions. Didn't have too many dreams. You come to the city and there is like loads of things. And that triggers your greed and gluttony. I want to do this, and I want to do this. But someone lives in the village. What is the maximum they can dream of? What will they be imagining? How will they lead their day? With the introduction of television and electricity, people stayed very, very late. Yes, it has a lot of benefits. Yes, our ability to treat illnesses and have electricity in our hospitals and all of that is high. Yes, we can extract water from underneath earth. There is loads of things. Means of transport has become much faster. But on the other side, it encouraged people to move away from their families and live as what we call nucleus families somewhere else. Why? I will come back every week. I'll come back every couple of weeks. But moving away from families back in the days was a big thing. How often will you see them? Means of communication, yes, it has facilitated seeking of knowledge. But it has given us so much knowledge out there that we don't know what should we seek and what shouldn't we seek. What to do with that? It has decreased our ability to dedicate some time and just go finish this and come back. But back in the days, they know I have 4 years, I need to go finish this because I will not have the luxury of coming back. Right? Now,
others study the maxims, which are formulations of succinct wisdom, the analogical content and the sermons that are to shake human hearts and are almost capable of pulverizing mountains. They concentrated on the promises and threats, warnings and good tidings, the mention of death and resurrection, the mustering and the judgment and heaven and hell.
Yes, so these are called?
These were made into sermons and admonitions, and those who delivered them were called orators and preachers. Others concentrated on the verses regulating inheritance, detailing shares and defining the deserving recipients. This was called Ilm al-Fara'id, the science of inheritance. They derived from it the divisions of shares into halves, thirds, quarters, sixths, and eighths, how to calculate who deserves what, and the rules of testaments.
So what does that mean? That means that the Quran is indirectly encouraging us to learn maths. Isn't it? Because you cannot know how to divide inheritance unless you know numbers and maths, isn't it? So learning maths is a means to fulfill ilm al-fara'id. You won't be able to do it unless you know, unless you learn. How are you going to? And also knowing what we call ilm al-arham, knowing the relationships between people. You know the father. And also establishing a society that is based on families in that traditional familial structure. So how is that relevant to us today? When you strike down family structure, you're striking down not only the society, but you're striking a whole tradition of estate division, science of inheritance. If families become composed of 2 fathers or 2 mothers, how are you going to divide inheritance in that situation? If it is 2 individuals of the same gender, or if the person is of no declared gender, what share in inheritance can I give them? Right? There is a paper written by one of the graduates of Zaytuna Institute. I can't remember what was her name. She speaks very beautifully about this concept. That gender is not just an issue of identity. It has a wide web and net of relational rights and responsibilities in any society. That once you damage this, you're damaging loads and loads and loads and loads of things. a family that is composed of like two fathers or two mothers. Then there is another individual who is deprived of inheritance if you recognize this family. Who? The biological mother or father of the child. And if it's none of the two, then it's the mother and the father of the actual child. You're depriving them of the right of the product of their own union. Right? So trying to play around with like, as long as this is consensual, as long as this is this, as long as you're now giving back the power of decision to human beings. And remember that human beings have limited experience. And because we have limited experience, we need an external power to decide our interaction with one another. So Muslims had to learn mathematics in order to divide this. They had to learn geometry. They had to learn astronomy in order to decide the timings of Salah, the direction of Salah. There is one of the ulum called Ilm al-Badhahanj. Al-Hafiz ibn Tulun mentions it. Ilm al-Badhahanj is this science, it's a form of architecture, where back in the days they used to make a structure, a construction of something similar to a minaret on the side of the house with windows in four sides. It lets the air in and takes it down beneath the floor so that it cools the house. It's like an AC, but very traditional one. Where to make that structure, you have to know what is the movement of the wind in that region and when does it actually come. And to make sure that the spot where you erect the Badhahanj is the most attractive spot for wind. So it can get the maximum degree of cool breeze so that you can AC the house, you can condition the house. And you should also learn how to block it so that in the winter the house doesn't turn very, 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 very cold at night. Right? Especially if it's in the desert. This was a ilm. Right. Go on.
Buddhists examine the verses pointing out the cosmic marvels in God's creation, the succession of night and day, the movements of the sun and the phases of the moon and the stars and constellations. From these they came up with ilm al-muwaqid, the science of time.
Yes. How many people nowadays know this ilm of timekeeping? Our complete dependence on gadgets. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ النُّجُومَ لِتَهْتَدُوا بِهَا فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. It is He who has made the stars for you to navigate through them in the darknesses of the sea and the land. How many people can navigate following the stars? How many people can navigate going to a destination without depending on their GPS? The other day, I was in London, one brother was supposed to pick me up to meet his father. And then his father called me just before Salatul Jummah. Ya Sheikh, I'm really sorry, but can you get an Uber and come? My son's phone has died and he can't get to your house. It was my in-laws' house. I said, it's a very straight road. Just get out of the house and get onto the... He said, I didn't know which side of the North Circular should I go to, south or north. That's how much loss. I said, you're worse than a cat. Because a cat can always find its way back to where it came from. A pigeon, back in the days they said, they used to use pigeons in communication. How? If you have pigeons, if you've grown pigeons, you give them to me and I give you mine. When I want to send a message, I put it in the leg of one of your pigeons because they know where they came from, regardless of how many years. So they return back to where they came from. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to relate to the cosmos through timekeeping. So we keep an eye on the movement of the sun. We keep an eye on movement of the moon. Sheikh Abdul Hamid al-Mubarak, he was talking about irrigation system. See, there was a real case of disputation between two people who had the same water passage in front of their farms. What would be the share of water they have, each one of them? And in fiqh, they discussed that. They discussed that. The right to water. Who should have the opportunity, who should have the first share of water? And how can we administer justice in how much water should this farm take and how much water should that farm take? Depending on plant, what are you actually growing? The size of your land, the width of your canals. If you dig a well in your land, can you sell the water of that well, or you should give it for free? And if people request access to it, and this is going to damage your crops, all of these things. Reviving a deserted land. So they studied all ilm al-mawaqit, they knew. Many years ago, subhanAllah, one of our shuyukh in Egypt called me and he said, get me this specific issue of a British magazine that was issued in 1904. 1904. I think it's called something on meteorology. So it had an article written by two English scientists who went to Egypt and stayed there for one whole year observing the sunset and the sunrise. And they discovered that the most accurate calendar was the Maliki calendar at the time. And these ulama did not have any machines or any calculations or any technology. How did they observe that? Right? How did they observe? How did they learn? How did they learn how to make spare parts for damaged human parts? If someone lost his tooth or someone lost his nose or someone lost... There was some charity dinner also many years ago, and I was asked to speak about it. Was a charity that provides second-hand aids for people who have disabilities in Pakistan. And I gave a talk, an extensive talk on who were the first people who used glasses. Muslims used glasses at the time of the Tabi'een. And spare parts. He said, وَكَانَ لَهُ رِجْلٌ مِّنْ خَشَبٍ. So and so one of the Tabi'een, he had a wooden leg. His Bible says, وَكَانَ لَهُ رِجْلٌ مِّنْ خَشَبٍ. And this Sahabi who took فَاتَّخَذَ أَنْفًا مِّن ذَهَبٍ. He took a golden nose. Because his nose was cut in the battlefield. So he took, like, they made for him a spare part. Possibly the first eye surgery that happened in the world is that which the Prophet ﷺ conducted on Qatada ibn Nu'man radiallahu anhu, when he put the eye of Qatada back in its place. So all of these ulum were embedded in the Quranic, in what the Quran requested from human beings, from Muslims. So it forced them it encouraged them to look at ilm al-mawaqit. It encouraged them to look at ilm al-mawarith. It encouraged them subsequently to look at mathematics, at astronomy, at trigonometry. And they found no shame in bringing all of these too. Until much later, when people started to develop secular sciences, religious sciences. That's fake. In Islam, there is no sacred and non-sacred. Whatever is for the service of humanity, whatever brings people close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever is for maslahatul ibad is sacred. Al-Shafi'i rahimahullah said, Al-ilmu ilman, ilmu abdan wa ilmu adyan. There are two types of knowledge. There is the one that relates to physicality, medicine, and ilmu adyan, theology. Sheikh Hamza talks about the three liberal jobs. The job of a lawyer, lawyers, The job of theologians? Anyone is a lawyer? These two? You're becoming a lawyer, inshallah? Inshallah ta'ala. So theologians, lawyers, and physicians. And anybody else, his job is servable job. It's a job of service. It's there to serve the society rather than to liberate the person himself. Now, continue.
Writers and poets studied its literary excellence, fluency, harmonious succession of ideas, preambles and conclusions, variations in style, prolixity at certain times and concision at others.
No.
From this they derived the science of style and figurative expression.
No.
People of subtle indications and inward realities perceived fine meanings to which they gave definitions so as to form a technical vocabulary comprising terms such as extinction and subsistence, presence, sphere and all, intimacy and estrangement, contraction and expansion, and so on.
Yes, so they find all of these meanings in the wording of the Quran.
These are the various arts that the Muslim community derived from the Quran. This describes only a glimpse of the tremendous intellectual activity exerted by the community to serve the Quranic text and extract from it a large variation of science and arts. This is how the community served the Quranic text and how the various groups of scholars intensively studied the text's brief indications and suggestions, transforming each of them into a working program and a practically applicable method. They so thoroughly researched every subject mentioned in the Quran that out of these studies, sciences, arts and crafts were born.
Yes, so when someone asks today that we should subjugate the Quran to the historical method or the scientific method or this method or that method, they're basically reducing the status of the Quran and making it subsequent to human invented sciences. Because in the history of the Ummah, human invented sciences were invented in service of the Quran, not the other way around. It puts revelation and then everything follows from revelation. But when you put human inventions, which is limited, and you try to subjugate the absolute, and unfortunately some Muslims fall into this trap by trying to prove how valid the Quran is by saying, look, the Quran contains some scientific things. The Quran contains some scientific discoveries. The Quran doesn't need to contain any of that because the Quran, first of all, is not a book of science. And it is not there to prove itself for science. Right.
To transform the verses of the Quran into working programs is a most important matter, one with momentous consequences. Only then will the Quran flow through the community and be transformed into practical applications. It is a scientific endeavor that requires much study and research into the very manner of interpreting the Quran. In brief, the Quran forms the background of all the sources of knowledge of the community, of its sciences, methods of functioning and cognitive schemes. It defines its identity, shapes its behavior and influences its history.
Yes.
The Quran has bequeathed to the Muslim scientists methods that were tried and tested. These were based upon two firm foundations: revelation, which is the Quran and the sciences that sprung from it, and field observation, confirmed with both research and logical deduction. Thus the community produced knowledge based on its own sources and methods, its world view, and what followed in the way of historical development and human experience. The knowledge of the ancestors, the companions and the followers came from inborn aptitudes, for their innate Arab genius allows them to understand the Quran without recourse to a taught method of analysis. They read the Quran and extracted from it all the above mentioned kinds of knowledge.
And that's why we call this malaka. They said there are three meanings for knowledge. When we use the word knowledge, we're referring to one of three meanings. We're referring to the talent. So when you say this person has knowledge, it means he has the talent. Or the person might not have the talent. So when you use the word knowledge, you refer to the rules that are embedded in books. So you say, هذا كتاب علم. This is a book of knowledge. What does it mean? It contains the rules and the foundations that teach us a specific subject. When you look at a book, when you pick up a book and say, this book contains ilmun nahu, it contains the science of grammar, it means it contains the rules through which we can learn it. When you say this person, mashallah, has ilmun nahu, it could mean that he has the talent of grammar. Or you say, I am studying ilmun nahu, I am studying grammar, it means I am trying to develop the talent that enables me later on to use grammar. At the time of the revelation, Arabs did not need much as we need today. Obviously not all of them, but many of them, their Arabic, the level of their language was so strong, they were familiar with so much vocabulary that was common at the time of the Quran, the revelation of the Quran. Therefore, they didn't have this language barrier that we need to overcome in order to understand the Quran at a very basic level. So their challenge was to understand when was the Quran revealed, and that again was available to the Sahaba because they were with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They didn't need to know. They did not have the barrier of understanding what does this ayah talk about. Why? Because it was revealed when they were around. When you live an experience with someone, you will be the best person to relate what is said into the context in which it was said. So many of the Sahaba didn't have that problem. They didn't have the language barrier, they didn't have that issue. And they also didn't have the issue. So their grammar was already embedded. They didn't need to learn morphology, they didn't need to learn grammar. They didn't also need to learn the occasions of revelation because they were already part of it. Possibly they didn't even to learn an-nasikh wal-mansukh, abrogation, because they witnessed the first revelation and the revelation that came to abrogate it. But some of them had to understand ambiguous ayat of the Quran. So, Ya Rasulullah, how can this be? As we mentioned last time, when Adi ibn Hatim al-Ta'i came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Adi ibn Hatim al-Ta'i came from the northeastern side of Arabia, close to what we know today as Iraq. So he was not like the Qurayshis. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. Eat and drink until the white thread and the black thread become distinguished. So Adi ibn Hatim thought, well, it's talking about threads, strings. So you got a black thread and white thread, put them under his pillow. And in his house, there is no electricity. So every now and then he removes his pillow and he looks at the threads, waiting for them to be distinguished. When will you be able to see them? When there is light. So he kept eating and eating and eating until sunrise. He came, Ya Rasulullah, I only realized this after sunrise. I could only see them after sunrise. He said, the thread of the night, the thread of the day, this is metaphor. Sometimes metaphor was understandable to them, and sometimes it was not understandable to them. Not because of the use of the metaphor, but because of the occasion. You sometimes tell a story or a joke, and people don't laugh. Why? Because the cultural context of this joke is very ununderstandable to them. Isn't it? You relate a joke, but because people, yes, they understand your language, but they don't know why are they laughing. Right? Sometimes you look around, why are we supposed to laugh in this situation? Why? Because people they don't understand the context. So the Qurayshiyun would understand certain things that others wouldn't understand. So they would ask the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, what does this mean? Right?
In subsequent generations, this natural aptitude gradually diminished.
Yeah.
This impoverishment being compensated for by a gradual development of intellectual methods designed to replace these natural aptitudes.
So you see, natural aptitude, they had this natural talent. It started to decline. So the ulama said, okay, we need to preserve this talent. How? by preparing people to go up again. So if it declines, it can be reduced to technical rules and steps. Like someone growing up in a Muslim society or in an environment, they memorize. Then at an old age, he realizes, or they realize, that memorization is not a common culture in England, for example. So they are asked, can you teach us how to memorize? No, not can we memorize? No. Can you describe to us steps for memorization? People didn't need tips to memorize. Right? Nowadays we talk about that. Can you give us some tips to memorize the Quran? No tips to memorize the Quran. No one, I remember when I was a child, no one came to me and said, oh, these are good tips to memorize the Quran. You just go to the maktab and memorize, that's it. But nowadays, people need tips. Yes, they had some tips to memorize ilm. This is just repetition. Al-Hafiz Abdul Rahman ibn al-Jawzi talks about al-hathu ala hifz al-ilm, encouraging people to memorize ilm, wa dhikru kibar al-hufaz, and he speaks of some foods that people should, and this is all they should kind of eat in order to memorize it. But that's all experience. That's all kind of personal. It might work for someone, it might not work for another individual. But generally, repetition. But someone might say, well, I've been repeating this, but it doesn't stick. Yes, because you're holding the phone with the other hand. I've been repeating this how many times? 5 times. Allahu Akbar. This. Even a pigeon will not memorize by that. A pigeon needs more than that. You won't even memorize your name if you repeat it 5 times. So you need more than that. I mentioned to you last time, Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, how much he used to repeat. Imam al-Juwayni and Imam al-Ghazali, they used to repeat the dars 7 times on each step of the madrasa, step of the ceiling, right? And there was 70 steps, so 490 times. But that's how dedicated they were. So at every step he will stand and repeat what he says 7 times. Then the next step 7 times. So 70 steps by 7, 490 times. Now we lose that stamina after 5 or 6 times. So they worked out their way on how can we help people achieve the talent and the aptitude again, if not at the same level, at least close to that level. Go on.
The innate aptitudes of the first generations of Muslims were analyzed by their successors, and from being intellectual talents innate to the psyche, changed to become documented principles and recorded rules. Their successors were then required to study and assimilate them to be able to match the performance that had once come naturally to their elders. They did this in matters of linguistics, literary performance, and principles. I discussed this in detail in a separate book entitled Al-Ta'sil lil-Manhaj As-Salaf bil-Fahm, Foundations of the Method of Comprehension of the Elders.
Yes, so they had a methodology of understanding. If they had a methodology of understanding, that means that understanding is not secure to everyone who reads the text. And it's not secured to everyone who reads the text in any way. There is a specific qualification needed in the reader, and there is a specific qualities needed in the method. So a qualified individual might read the text, but he doesn't get what the text wants to say. The problem is in the tools. He lacks the tools. Or the person has the tools, but he's not qualified for them. I mean by has the tools, he can't apply, but he thinks he does. He thinks he does. So you need the person who is qualified, and at the same time you need the tools that are suitable. As we were mentioning today, why was it important to study Hukm al-Aql the rational judgment. Because a lot of people today, they confuse lay people by making them believe that empirical rulings, empirical judgments are equal to rational judgments. There is a big difference between both. When something by experiences cannot be proven by experience, it doesn't mean that it's rationally impossible. It can be empirically impossible, but rationally it is possible. Now, and we stop here inshallah ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad.